All right, let's jump into today's deep dive. We're going to be taking a look at Owens Law Group, PLLC. And what's interesting about this one is we've got their website, of course.
Yeah.
But we've also got some Google reviews so we can see what the firm says about itself, but then also what real people are saying about their experience with the firm.
Yeah, always interesting to get that kind of inside scoop.
Oh,
yeah.
To compare the firm's presentation with the reality.
Exactly. So right off the bat on the website, they're emphasizing, relationships, communication, results. I mean, that's pretty standard for law firms.
Oh, yeah, I see that a lot. It is a good reminder, though, of what people are generally looking for when they're hiring a lawyer.
Yeah, absolutely. They also mentioned they're a mid-sized firm.
Yeah.
Which I guess means they're not some giant faceless corporation.
Right. It suggests there's probably some balance between resources and personalized attention. And then if you look at their practice areas, they've got a pretty diverse range. Contracts, probate, real estate, even things like heir search and landlocked properties.
Heir search? What is that? That sounds like something out of a movie.
I know, right? Makes you wonder what kind of stories are behind those cases. But it does show they handle some pretty unique situations.
Okay, so speaking of potentially complex situations, probate seems to be a recurring theme on their website. Estate administration, heir search, which we just talked about,
Yeah.
and determination of heirships.
Yeah, probate's a big deal, especially here in Texas. It's basically the legal process and handling everything after someone passes away, figuring out their assets, distributing them according to the will. Or if there isn't a will, then according to state law, it can get pretty complicated.
Especially when emotions are running high.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So let's see what people are saying in these Google reviews, particularly about probate cases if we can. First off, their average rating is 5 stars. Only from 10 reviewers, though.
Yeah, it is a small sample size. But still, 5 stars in the legal field. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, people are usually quick to complain if they've had a bad experience, especially with lawyers. So in one review, Patricia Wooten specifically praised their probate expertise. She talked about their honesty, their knowledge, and how they really took the time to listen to her concerns.
Oh, yeah, I saw that review. And you know something else that stood out to me? Michelle Hendricks mentioned that both Mr. Owens and D. Grant Neal met with her for her initial consultation.
Interesting.
Yeah, it seems like they really are trying to put those relationships first.
Yeah, that's a good sign. It shows they're not just throwing any random lawyer at a case. They're really trying to make sure the client feels heard and understood.
Absolutely. And remember, Patricia also mentioned that they're strong trial attorneys. So if your case does end up in court, they can handle that too.
Okay, that's good to know. Because not all probate cases end up in litigation. Sometimes you can settle things outside of court. But it's good to have that option if you need it.
Definitely. Oh, and there's another review that mentioned efficiency. Eric Santillan, I think. He praised Travis Owens for being honest and making the whole process seamless.
Seamless, huh? That's always a good thing when it comes to legal matters. Honestly, just from these few reviews, I'm starting to get a pretty good feel for this firm.
Me too. They're definitely painting a consistent picture. A firm that values relationships, communication, and results, just like they say on their website.
Yeah, it's not just empty words. It seems like they're actually living up to their promises. What's also interesting is that these positive reviews span a few years. We've got some from 2019, 2021, and even 2023.
Yeah, that's a good sign. It suggests consistent quality over time, not just a fluke.
Right, exactly. Okay, so we've established that Owens Law Group seems to have a good track record, especially when it comes to probate. But what does that actually mean for someone who's facing a probate situation? What are some key things our listeners should be thinking about?
Well, that's a great question. It's one thing to read positive reviews, but it's another to understand how those translate to your specific situation.
Right. Like, how do you know if a firm's expertise truly aligns with your needs? What are some red flags to watch out for? And what kind of questions should you be asking to make sure they're the right fit for you?
Exactly. Those are all important things to consider. And that's where our deep dive gets even more interesting. We're going to move beyond these surface-level observations and really dig into the nuances of choosing the right legal representation for probate matters.
All right, I'm ready to dig deeper. Let's do it.
So before we get too deep into choosing the right representation for probate, I think it's important to remember that probate isn't just for the wealthy. It affects anyone who owns property or assets.
Right. It's easy to think of it as something that only rich families deal with. But really, anytime someone passes away and they own something, even something as simple as a bank account or a car, it becomes part of the probate process.
Yeah, exactly. And here in Texas, where property ownership is so common, understanding probate is pretty important for a lot of people. So let's say our listener is facing a probate situation. What are some key things they should be thinking about when evaluating a firm like Owens Law Group, based on what we've learned so far?
Well, from the reviews, it seems like they definitely have a strong grasp of probate law, and they've got a good track record. But I think beyond that, it's important to consider the personal side of things, too. Probate can be a really emotional process, so you want a lawyer who not only understands the law, but also has empathy and compassion.
Absolutely. Remember Patricia Wooten's review? She specifically mentioned how attentive they were to her concerns, how they really made her feel heard.
Yeah, that's so important. It's not just about winning a case. It's about navigating a difficult time with support. And that brings up another important point, communication. How transparent is the firm? Will they explain things clearly and answer your questions honestly?
That's key in any lawyer-client relationship, but especially in probate, where things can get so complicated. You need a lawyer who will keep you informed every step of the way and make sure you understand what's happening.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of things that can get complicated, let's talk about cost. Probate can be expensive, right?
It can be, yeah. It really depends on the complexity of the estate and whether there are any disputes or challenges, but it's definitely something you need to discuss up front to avoid any surprises down the road.
So what kind of questions should our listener be asking about fees?
Well, first and foremost, you want to know their fee structure. Do they charge an hourly rate or a flat fee for certain services? Are there any additional costs, like court filing fees or expert witness fees?
Okay, yeah, those are all good things to clarify.
And then you want to ask about their billing practices. How often do they send invoices? Do they require a retainer up front? Don't be afraid to ask for a detailed breakdown of their fees so you know exactly what you're paying for.
Transparency is key. It helps build trust and avoid misunderstandings.
Exactly. And speaking of trust, one thing that struck me about those Google reviews was how many people mentioned honesty and integrity.
Yeah, me too. It really seems like those values are important to this firm, but how can you really gauge a law firm's honesty and integrity before you actually work with them?
That's a tough one. Reviews can be helpful, but they're only one piece of the puzzle. I think you can also look for clues in how they communicate. Do they answer your questions directly? Even if the answer isn't what you want to hear, are they transparent about their fees? And honestly, sometimes you just have to trust your gut feeling. If something feels off, it's okay to look for another firm.
Yeah, trust your instincts. It's about finding a lawyer who you feel comfortable with, who you can be open and honest with, and who you believe has your best interests at heart.
Exactly. Someone who will be your advocate and guide you through this process with compassion and expertise.
So what would you say are the key takeaways so far? Especially for someone who might be on the fence about whether they even need a probate lawyer.
I think the biggest takeaway is that probate, even though it's often overlooked, it's a really important process, and it affects a lot of people. And finding a lawyer who specializes in probate, like Owens Law Group seems to do, can make all the difference in making sure your loved one's wishes are carried out smoothly and their assets are distributed fairly.
Right. And even if your situation seems straightforward, having a knowledgeable lawyer by your side can help you avoid potential pitfalls and make sure you're making informed decisions.
Absolutely. They can help you navigate the legalities, handle the paperwork, the deadlines, and deal with any unexpected challenges.
Okay, so let's say our listener is convinced they need a probate lawyer. What are some specific questions they should ask? Owens Law Group or any other firm during that initial consultation to make sure they're the right fit?
Oh, that's a great question. I'd start by asking about their experience with cases similar to yours. For example, if your case involves a contested will, you'll want to know how many of those they've handled and what their success rate has been.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's one thing to have general probate experience, but you want someone who's dealt with your specific type of situation before.
Exactly. I'd also ask about their communication practices. How often will they update you on the case? What's the best way to reach them? What are their expectations of you in terms of communication and involvement?
Right, those are all practical but important questions. Feeling informed and involved can make a big difference.
Absolutely. And then one more important question. How do they handle potential conflicts of interest? Probate can sometimes involve family disputes or disagreements, so you want to make sure your lawyer is aware of those potential conflicts and has a clear process for addressing them ethically.
Right, you want to make sure they're truly representing your best interests.
Exactly. It's about finding a lawyer you can trust, who will be your advocate throughout the entire probate process.
This has been such a helpful conversation. We've covered so much ground, from the basics of probate to finding the right representation.
It's amazing what you can learn from just a few online sources.
And some thoughtful analysis, and you know what we haven't even touched on, some of the broader trends that are shaping the legal landscape and how those might impact probate cases in the future.
Oh yeah, that's true. There's still a lot to explore. But I think before we jump into those broader trends, it might be good to pause for a moment. Let all this information sink in.
Yeah, good idea. Let's take a moment to digest everything we've talked about. And when we come back, we'll dive into those broader trends and how they might influence the future of probate law. All right, so we spent a lot of time talking about probate and what to look for in a firm like Owens Law Group. But I think it's time to zoom out a bit. What are some of the bigger trends that are happening in the legal world that our listeners should be aware of?
Yeah, the legal profession is definitely changing. Technology, demographics, even the way people access information. It's all having an impact on how people interact with lawyers and the law itself.
Okay, so break it down for us. What are some of the trends that stand out to you, especially in the context of probate?
Well, one thing that's definitely relevant to probate is the increasing complexity of estates. People are living longer, they're accumulating more assets. And it's not just physical assets anymore. We're talking about digital assets, international holdings, blended families. All these things can make probate a lot more complicated than it used to be.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about digital assets. That makes sense. Those must create a whole new set of challenges for probate lawyers.
Exactly. And it kind of ties into another big trend we're seeing, specialization. Clients are increasingly looking for lawyers who have deep expertise in specific niches. They don't just want someone who has general knowledge. They want someone who really knows their stuff.
So it's kind of like choosing a doctor. You wouldn't go to a general practitioner for heart surgery. You'd want someone who specializes in that. So in the context of probate, what might that specialization look like?
Oh, for sure. There are definitely subspecialties within probate law. For example, you might have a lawyer who focuses on high net worth estates, with all the complex tax implications that come with that. Or you might have a lawyer who specializes in contested wills, or resolving disputes among beneficiaries. And as digital assets become more common, we might even see lawyers who specialize specifically in that area of probate law.
So how does this specialization benefit someone who's going through probate?
Well, it basically means you're getting a lawyer who's more familiar with your specific situation. They'll know the latest legal precedents, the potential pitfalls, and the most effective strategies for achieving your goals.
Okay, so it's like having a guide, someone who can lead you through the complexities of probate law.
Exactly.
And speaking of guides, another trend we touched on earlier was this emphasis on communication and transparency. Clients want to be kept in the loop. They want to understand what's going on. They don't want to feel like they're in the dark.
Right. There's definitely a shift in the power dynamic. Clients are more empowered than ever before, partly because of all the information that's available online. They're doing their research, comparing options, and demanding more from their lawyers.
And that's a good thing, right?
I think so. It pushes lawyers to be more responsive, more proactive, and more client-centered.
So it's a reminder that the legal profession needs to adapt, just like any other profession.
Exactly. And the firms that embrace those changes, the ones that prioritize communication, personalized attention, and specialization, those are the firms that are going to thrive.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into Owens Law Group and probate law in general, what are the key takeaways you want our listeners to walk away with?
Well, first and foremost, I want them to remember that probate is important. It affects a lot of people, not just the wealthy. And finding the right lawyer can make a huge difference. So look for someone with specialized knowledge, a good track record, and a commitment to communication.
And remember, the legal landscape is constantly changing.
Yes, absolutely. Stay informed, ask questions, and trust your instincts.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thanks so much for joining us and sharing your expertise.
It's been my pleasure. And to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep learning, and remember, you're not alone in navigating the legal world.
And that's a wrap on today's deep dive. Thanks for listening, everyone.